It started with a sound so small I almost didn't notice it, a dull, hollow thump in the middle of the night. Not loud enough to alarm me, not strange enough to get out of bed for. I figured it was the usual nocturnal nonsense that came with suburban life, maybe a raccoon flipping over trash cans or a possum scrambling across the porch. Things like that happened often enough that they stopped feeling unusual. So I rolled over, let the silence take me again, and thought nothing more of it. But the next morning, something felt off before I even stepped outside. You know that strange feeling, when the world looks the same but something's not quite right. I grabbed my coffee and walked to the end of the driveway, like I did every day, expecting to pick up the newspaper and maybe nod at a neighbor jogging by. But instead of the usual quiet start to my morning, I was greeted by the sad sight of my mailbox lying on its side like a drunk at last call, tilted, crooked, with the metal door flapping open and one screw barely holding the whole thing together. The post was splintered and angled awkwardly, like it had taken a hit and tried to survive it. It wasn't just knocked over, it was wounded. I stood there for a moment, squinting at it like I was hoping it would make sense if I stared long enough. But the road looked calm. There was no debris, no obvious clue, just the poor box slumped in defeat. My first thought was that maybe a delivery truck came too close to the curb. Maybe someone was backing out of a driveway late at night and misjudged the distance. Accidents happen, right? That's the nature of it. Things get broken, they get fixed, and life goes on. So I fetched my tools, hammered the post back into the dirt, and straightened it out as best I could. A few nails, a little paint, and it was standing again. Maybe a little crooked, but proud. I didn't think twice about it for the rest of the day. It was just one of those odd little suburban hiccups. But then 2 days later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't subtle. The entire post had been ripped out of the ground and tossed aside like trash, not just bent or leaning, gone. I found it a few feet away, split at the base, the mounting bolts twisted and snapped like a piece of brittle plastic. And this time, there were tire marks, faint but unmistakable, dark streaks in the grass that trailed off toward the street, like a scar across an otherwise perfect lawn. That's when I realized this wasn't just a random accident. Someone had run over my mailbox, deliberately, and not just once. They'd backed up and done it again for good measure. I stood over the broken remains, gripping the post like I was trying to make sense of a crime scene. Who does that? Who takes the time to run down someone's mailbox in the middle of the night? The idea rolled around in my head like a loose marble, confusing, frustrating, a little unreal. I couldn't wrap my head around it. This wasn't a bad parking job. This was intentional, malicious. So, I did what any reasonable person would do. I fixed it. Again. Dug a new hole, replaced the post, even upgraded the hardware. I figured maybe it was a one-time thing. A teenager out too late. Some neighbor's kid trying to be funny. Suburbs have their fair share of weirdos. And again, I moved on. Or tried to. But the pattern didn't stop. Just as I settled back into my routine, it happened again. Then again. Every 2 nights, like clockwork. Always in the dead of night. Always without a sound loud enough to wake me. My mailbox would go from standing tall to lying in pieces before I ever had a chance to catch whoever was behind it. Sometimes it was tire tracks that gave them away. Other times it was the way the screws had been yanked out or the paint had been scraped clean off. But each time it was deliberate, clean, efficient, like someone was enjoying it. I started to feel like I was part of a cruel prank show that no one told me I signed up for. I tried to laugh it off, tried to pretend it wasn't getting to me, but with every rebuild, my patience thinned. I'd spend an hour fixing it, only to find it destroyed again 48 hours later. I'd repaint it, reseal it, plant it deeper into the ground. Still, the outcome was always the same. It was as if someone had declared war on my mailbox, and I was losing. At first, I suspected kids, maybe someone in the neighborhood got bored. But this didn't feel like teenage vandalism. It wasn't messy or reckless. It was methodical, precise. Like it was part of someone's schedule: brush teeth, drink tea, destroy the neighbor's mailbox. The more I thought about it, the more it ate away at me. Who had something against a mailbox? Who took pleasure in smashing it again and again? I started asking around. Casual conversations with neighbors turned into awkward interrogations. "You ever hear anything weird at night?" I'd ask, trying to sound light-hearted like I wasn't on the verge of a breakdown. Most of them shook their heads. A few gave me that sympathetic look people give when they think you're overreacting. One guy mentioned hearing an engine revving loudly around 2 a.m. Another neighbor vaguely recalled seeing a grey SUV idling near my driveway, but didn't think much of it. Of course, that didn't help. Half the HOA drove grey SUVs. It was like trying to solve a mystery in a parking lot full of clones. By the fourth time it happened, I'd gone from confused to furious. I stopped pretending it was just bad luck. I wasn't just the unlucky recipient of random accidents. This was sabotage. Someone was out there watching, waiting for just the right moment to hit again. And the worst part? I couldn't catch them. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how late I stayed up, they were always a step ahead. They knew exactly when to strike, when I was distracted, out of the house, or too tired to keep watch. It wasn't just frustrating, it was violating. I felt like I was losing my mind. Filing a complaint seemed like the next logical step, so I did. I wrote up the incident, added photos of the damaged mailbox, and submitted it to the HOA. I even printed out a timeline of the hits, complete with notes and arrows. I expected a phone call, a visit, something. But all I got back was a cold, automated reply. "Thank you for your report. We will look into the matter." And that was it. Days passed, more destruction, more silence. Every time I rebuilt it, it was like giving the invisible attacker a fresh canvas. And they didn't waste it. They came back like it was a routine part of their life, a silent ritual. I wasn't just frustrated anymore, I was obsessed. It wasn't just about a mailbox. It was about being targeted, toyed with, laughed at behind curtains. Whoever was doing this didn't just want to break something, they wanted to get under my skin, and they were winning, but not for long. I started losing sleep. Not just from the mailbox hits, but from the tension that settled into my bones. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind brushing the windows at night had me peeking through the blinds like some twitchy conspiracy theorist. I began staying up late on purpose, lights off, coffee brewed, just sitting in the dark by the window, waiting. My flashlight was on standby. I even had a thermos and a lawn chair out back like I was on some solo stakeout mission. It felt ridiculous, but I had no choice. I was dealing with a ghost. Whoever this person was, they were good. Too good. Every time I let my guard down, just long enough to use the bathroom or doze off for a minute, they struck. It was always in that sliver of time when I wasn't watching. And each time I walked out to find the wreckage, it felt more personal. I tried everything short of hiring a private investigator. I trimmed the bushes near the mailbox, thinking maybe someone was using them as cover. I installed brighter porch lights, hoping the added visibility would deter whoever was doing it. I even changed the location of the mailbox slightly, wondering if maybe that would throw them off. But no matter what I did, they kept coming back. Precision hits, never damaging anything else, just the mailbox, like it was a game to them. My frustration boiled over when one morning I found the box bent backwards, the wood split in a perfect V shape, and the metal flag snapped clean off. It wasn't just destruction, it was mockery. What made it worse was how normal everything looked during the day. The neighborhood buzzed with dog walkers and lawnmowers, kids on bikes and people watering their hedges. Everyone smiled, waved, acted like we all lived in a peaceful little bubble. But I knew someone among them was playing a sick little game. Every neighbor became a suspect. I watched their routines like a detective unraveling a mystery, hoping to catch a hint, a glance, some twitch of guilt. But people kept their masks on tight. And the more I watched them, the more I felt like I was the outsider, like I was the one going crazy. Eventually, I gave in and filed another report with the HOA. This time, I walked into their office with a stack of printed photos and a timeline of events that could rival a crime board. I wanted them to see it, to feel the absurdity of what was happening. And that's when I met her, Karen. If there was ever a person who embodied HOA authority with the warmth of a brick wall, it was her. Perfectly styled hair, a frozen smile, and eyes that scanned like barcodes. She sat behind that front desk like she owned every square inch of the neighborhood. I approached, politely at first, clearing my throat and explaining the situation. I showed her the photos, laid out the pattern, the repeated vandalism, the tire marks, the bent posts. I even pointed to the absurdity of having to rebuild the same mailbox 4 times in under 2 weeks. Karen tilted her head and looked at me like I had just asked her how electricity worked. "Oh, your mailbox," she said slowly, as if the word itself was foreign to her. I could practically hear the gears turning as she tried to figure out how to dismiss me without sounding completely heartless. "Well, it could have been the wind. These older posts, they tend to snap easily." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "The wind," I repeated. "You think the wind tore it out of the ground, snapped the base, and left tire marks all over my yard?" She smiled again, tight, calculated. The kind of smile you give when you don't really care, but you want to appear concerned enough to make the problem go away. I pressed further, desperate for her to take it seriously. "It's not just once. It's every other night. Same time. Same damage. Someone is targeting my property." She glanced at the photos again, gave them a little nod, and laced her fingers together. "Well, we'll look into it," she said in that perfectly vague HOA tone. "But in the meantime, you'll want to make sure your mailbox is up to HOA standards, correct height, proper materials, and the approved paint color. We wouldn't want to issue a fine for non-compliance." I blinked. "Wait, you're saying I might get fined because someone else keeps destroying it?" Karen shrugged. "Standards are standards." I walked out of that office feeling like I'd just had a conversation with a malfunctioning robot. My mailbox was being repeatedly annihilated, and the only feedback I got was a threat about paint color. That's when it started to dawn on me. Karen wasn't just indifferent. She was enjoying it. She liked having the power to say things without really saying anything. The kind of person who reads the rule book not to follow it, but to weaponize it. Still, I wasn't going to let her win. I rebuilt the mailbox again. This time I made it cleaner, straighter. I added a reflective strip for visibility, braced it deeper into the ground, painted it a neutral grey to avoid another lecture about HOA-approved tones. I followed every rule to the letter. No one could accuse me of being out of line. I did everything by the book. And for a few days, things were quiet. Peaceful even. No wreckage. No tire marks. Just normal mornings. I started to relax, just a little. Thought maybe Karen had passed word along, or that whoever had been messing with me got bored and moved on. Then one morning, I spotted Karen herself jogging past my house. It was early, just past sunrise. She wore a bright pink tracksuit that practically glowed against the grey sky. Her expression was unreadable, just a smirk that hovered somewhere between friendly and smug. She gave me a wave. I nodded back. No words. Just that lingering expression, like she wanted me to know something without actually saying it. I stood on my porch, watching her vanish down the block, and something about it didn't sit right. That smirk, that timing, that color. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe not. But the air felt different that day. Charged, like something was about to snap again, and I was right. The next hit didn't come that night or the night after. It waited until I let my guard down. It was a Sunday morning. I was in my usual spot, front window, warm coffee, bare feet on the rug. The kind of peaceful suburban moment people daydream about. The sun was just starting to stretch across the lawn. I wasn't even thinking about the mailbox anymore. And then, like a scene from a slow-motion movie, I saw it. A grey SUV creeping up the street, almost hesitant. It slowed as it neared my yard. I squinted, my coffee halfway to my lips. Behind the wheel, Karen. Eyes scanning the road, visor pulled low, one hand on the wheel. The moment she reached the edge of my property, everything clicked into place. She paused, looked around. Then she did something so brazen, so insane, I nearly dropped my mug. She hit the gas. Her SUV launched forward like a missile. My newly rebuilt mailbox, still perfect, still standing, took the hit dead center. Wood cracked, screws popped. The whole thing crumpled like a house of cards under a steel-toed boot. Then, like that wasn't enough, she backed up and rolled over it again. Just to be sure, just to twist the knife. And then she parked, casually, like it was just another errand. No rush, no concern. She stepped out of her SUV and adjusted her visor like she was arriving at a brunch reservation. I stormed outside, coffee still in hand, voice rising before I even reached the driveway. "What the hell was that, Karen?" I shouted, disbelief still crawling up my spine. She turned, surprised or pretending to be. "Oh," she said innocently, blinking like a cat stretching in the sun. "I didn't even see it. Your mailbox just appeared out of nowhere." I stared at the wreckage, the torn-up earth, the mangled post. It's been there for 5 years. She shrugged, stepping around the destruction like it was someone else's problem. "Well, it didn't match the approved HOA mailbox color anyway. It's supposed to be antique bronze. Yours was, what is that? Depressing grey." My jaw locked. "You mean the same grey as your car?" She blinked like the sun had offended her. "Look, I'm not saying it's your fault, but maybe if you followed the guidelines. You're not even sorry, are you?" Another shrug. "I'm the HOA President. Technically, I could issue a fine." And that's when it all became clear. Karen wasn't just a problem. She was the problem. The smugness, the authority, the hits that always came just after I fixed it. The SUV, the smile, the tracksuit. It wasn't random. It wasn't careless. She knew exactly what she was doing. And now she thought she'd get away with it again. But if she thought I was just another quiet neighbor willing to roll over and take it, she was in for a surprise. Because I wasn't going to rebuild the mailbox this time. I was going to rebuild the rules, and I'd make sure the next round of this little game would be one she'd never forget. I didn't sleep that night, not because I couldn't, but because I refused to. Karen had crossed a line. Not just by flattening my mailbox like it owed her money, but by doing it with the confidence of someone who truly believed there'd be no consequences. And for a moment, she was right. She thought she had me pinned, stuck between the HOA rulebook and her own smug authority. But what she didn't realize was that she hadn't broken me. She'd woken something up. All that time I spent fixing my mailbox, rebuilding it with hope that reason would eventually prevail. That part of me was gone now. Karen had driven over it along with the last post, and what she left behind was someone ready to push back, strategically, precisely, and with more patience than she ever expected. The next morning, I didn't bother cleaning up the wreckage. I left it there on purpose, like a chalk outline at a crime scene. Let the whole neighborhood walk by and see what she'd done. I wanted her to know I wasn't hiding the damage anymore. I wasn't pretending this was an accident. I wanted her to feel that tight, prickly feeling you get when your secrets start becoming public knowledge. But I didn't storm back into the HOA office. I didn't yell. I didn't even speak to her. No, I let the silence do the heavy lifting. And while she jogged past in that obnoxious tracksuit, eyes flicking to the debris she created, I stayed on my porch, arms crossed, watching her with the calm of someone who was done playing defense. I spent the rest of that day planning, not reacting, planning. Karen thought she was the only one in the neighborhood who could use rules as weapons, but she underestimated how far someone pushed too far could go. I started by collecting every HOA regulation I could find. Every rule about mailbox dimensions, placement, materials, paint color, you name it. I wasn't going to give her a single technicality to hang a fine on. Then I visited the hardware store. But this wasn't a run for garden supplies or a few nails. This was a mission. I walked those aisles like I was shopping for armor, not decor. I picked out materials that would outlast weather, time, and Karen's bumper combined. And while I loaded up wood, paint, brackets, and bolts, I kept thinking about her face, the way she had casually dismissed the destruction she caused, the way she twisted blame while standing on the ruins of what she broke. That weekend, while the neighborhood enjoyed their barbecues and lawn games, I got to work. It started with digging, a deeper, wider hole than I'd ever made before. At the base, I laid a heavy concrete foundation, packed and cured like I was building the cornerstone of a monument. Then came the post, solid hardwood, reinforced with steel rods running through its center, anchored by brackets bolted into the concrete below. I wrapped it in decorative casing to meet HOA standards, but inside, it was a fortress. I even chose a mailbox with a reinforced door and riveted panels. And yes, I painted it. The exact antique bronze shade from the HOA's color guide, just a hair darker than Karen's SUV. Call it a creative coincidence. As I stood back to admire the finished product, there was no satisfaction in the usual sense. No smile, no pride, just certainty. This wasn't a mailbox anymore. It was a challenge, a statement. I wasn't just rebuilding what she destroyed. I was telling her in every screw and slab of concrete that I was done letting her win. The days that followed were eerily quiet. No tire marks, no broken posts, no smug remarks. Karen jogged past once or twice, but she didn't wave. Her eyes stayed forward, jaw tight. Maybe she knew something was different. Maybe she felt the weight of the mailbox as she passed it. I didn't try to guess what she was thinking. I just waited. Because if there was one thing I'd learned by now, it was that Karen couldn't resist the itch to assert control. She needed to feel in charge, and my new mailbox, standing tall like a monument she couldn't bend, was too loud of a reminder that she'd failed. And then, on the fourth morning, it happened. The silence broke. It was early, barely past dawn. I was standing at my window again, coffee in hand, slippers dragging across the hardwood as I made my morning rounds. That's when I saw it. The grey SUV, her grey SUV, creeping down the street like a shadow, pretending to be a car. She moved slowly, tires whispering over asphalt, eyes darting around like she was checking to see if the coast was clear. But it wasn't. I was right there, watching every inch of her calculated crawl. She reached my house and paused, just for a second. Enough time for me to see her shoulders tense, and then, like a flip had been switched inside her, she punched the accelerator. Her SUV lunged forward with all the subtlety of a freight train. I didn't even blink. The front end slammed into the mailbox with a loud metallic crunch, except this time something was different. There was no satisfying collapse, no wood splinters, no scattered pieces. The mailbox didn't move, not an inch. Karen's bumper folded in like an empty soda can. Her hood crumpled. And then, in a moment that defied all logic, the airbag exploded inside the SUV, filling the cabin with white. I swear I saw her glasses fly off. The whole thing was over in a second, but the image of her stunned face, lit up by the sun and framed by a deflated airbag, will live rent-free in my mind forever. She pushed the door open like a drunk stumbling out of a cab, hair disheveled, one shoe missing, eyes darting in every direction. She staggered toward the mailbox and stood in front of it, blinking in disbelief. Rubbing her forehead, she looked like she'd just woken up from a dream where physics no longer worked. There it stood, completely untouched, not a dent, not even a scuff on the paint. And next to it, her SUV, hood smoking, front bumper mangled beyond recognition, leaking something that probably cost $300 a quart. I stepped outside, quiet and calm, coffee still warm in my hand. The breeze was soft, the kind that carried the scent of freshly cut grass. She didn't say anything at first. She just stared at the mailbox, like it had betrayed her. I took a few slow steps down the walkway and met her at the edge of the lawn. "You might want to get that bumper looked at," I said, not unkindly, but not exactly concerned either. Funny how the mailbox didn't appear out of nowhere this time. She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, then closed it again. Her cheeks flushed red, and not from the early morning chill. "This is a safety hazard," she spat, gesturing to the post. "I'm going to report you to the HOA board." I sipped my coffee and raised an eyebrow. "By all means. But you might want to let your insurance know first. That mailbox meets every regulation in the book. Color, height, material, you name it." I let the silence hang for a moment. "You sure you want to start a paper trail on this one?" Karen stared at me, the gears turning, the humiliation washing over her in waves. She looked down at her wrecked car, back at the mailbox, then at me. Her mouth moved like she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she turned around and stomped back to her SUV, slamming the door so hard it bounced slightly before it latched. The engine sputtered, then groaned as she reversed and pulled away, dragging her dignity behind her like a busted muffler. And as the sound of her retreat faded into the distance, I turned back to the mailbox, still standing, unshaken, built like defiance. Let's just say, from that day on, Karen found a different route for her morning jog, and for the first time in weeks, my mornings were quiet again. Peaceful. I didn't have to sit by the window anymore. I didn't have to rebuild anything, because sometimes the best defense isn't just building something stronger, it's letting people run straight into the wall they thought you'd never build. She had no idea just how far I was willing to go. The collision may have left her SUV bruised and her pride battered, but for me, it was a turning point. Not the end of the feud, but the beginning of something far more satisfying. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-declared queen of the cul-de-sac, the iron-fisted ruler of flower bed regulations and mailbox measurements. And like every monarch drunk on power, she assumed no one would ever push back. She believed that all she had to do was smile that smug little smirk, wave a printed rule in your face, and you'd bend to her will. But now, she had miscalculated, badly. And I wasn't going to let the moment go to waste. The mailbox stood like a monument to petty justice. Every inch of it perfectly aligned with HOA standards, every measurement double-checked, every material hand-picked from the sacred codebook she loved to quote. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. Inside the wooden frame, cold rolled steel encased the core, and that core was welded to a beam sunk 3 feet deep into a solid concrete base. The kind of structure you could anchor a streetlight to. Decorative on the outside, immovable on the inside. I had planned it not just to endure, but to respond. The next few days were blissfully uneventful. Karen didn't jog past anymore. She didn't wave. She didn't send any concerned notices in the mail. In fact, she disappeared from the neighborhood landscape altogether, save for her SUV, which now bore the bruises of her defeat, its front end dented like it had survived a head-on collision with a tank. But I knew Karen. She wasn't going to just crawl away into the shadows and lick her wounds. No, people like her always find a way to strike back, even if they have to invent a reason. So, I waited. Not with fear, not even with tension, but with a kind of amused anticipation. Because I knew something she didn't. I had already won the war. Now it was just a matter of how loudly she wanted to lose. That win became crystal clear the following week during the neighborhood watch meeting. Once a month, we gathered at the community hall, a bright room filled with rows of plastic chairs, a few urns of bad coffee, and the occasional tray of sugar cookies some well-meaning resident brought along. The meetings were usually an exercise in tolerating complaints disguised as concerns. Trash bins left out too long, lawn heights exceeding regulation, someone's dog barking after 9 p.m. But this one was different. There was a buzz in the air as neighbors filed in, whispering, glancing at one another, sharing something just beneath the surface. Karen arrived late. She always did. A power move. She walked in wearing a pale blue blouse and black slacks, like she was heading to a courtroom, clipboard tucked under one arm, lips pursed in that carefully curated line between disapproval and self-righteousness. She scanned the room like a teacher entering a classroom of unruly children, but this time the glances weren't deferential. They were curious, appraising, some were even amused. The head of the neighborhood watch, a retired firefighter named Carl, stood up at the front and welcomed everyone, thanked us for coming and mentioned they were trying something new that evening, a small segment on community awareness, a little moment to share tips on safety, good practices and, if needed, cautionary tales. And then, without fanfare, he queued up a short video on the screen. It started innocently enough. A shot of the street, my house, the sun creeping over the trees, a grey SUV rolling down the lane, and then, impact. Karen's SUV ploughed into the mailbox like it was aiming to erase it from existence. The collision was immediate, jarring, final. The front end crumpled. The mailbox didn't budge. Gasps rippled through the room. Some stifled chuckles followed. Carl let it play twice. When it ended, he cleared his throat. "Let this be a reminder," he said, "that reckless driving, even on private roads, can cause serious damage and embarrassment. Let's all slow down, obey traffic rules, and respect our neighbor's property." Karen didn't speak. Her face was a shade I hadn't seen before, redder than sunburn, redder than rage. Her jaw was clenched so tightly you could hear her grinding her teeth from the second row. The clipboard in her arms trembled just a little. No one said her name. No one had to. Everyone in that room knew exactly what they'd just witnessed. And more importantly, they knew what it meant. that her reign of passive-aggressive control might finally be cracking. After the meeting, neighbors who once kept quiet started to approach me. Some just smiled. Others offered knowing nods or a whispered, "That was brilliant." A few shared their own frustrations, stories of nitpicking, fines for minor infractions, mysteriously rejected paint swatches. It turned out I wasn't alone. Karen had been running her little fiefdom with an iron fist for years, and most people just endured it, assuming resistance was futile. But now they had proof that she wasn't untouchable, that she could be outplayed. She avoided me after that, for weeks. Her car got repaired eventually, but she never parked near my house again. The mailboxes on the block remained upright. Peace returned to the neighborhood, not because everyone suddenly found harmony, but because the tyrant had finally learned her limits. Or at least she'd been reminded that even power has boundaries. I tended to my mailbox like a gardener might tend to a prized tree. I cleaned it regularly, polished the bronze to a soft sheen, and repainted the wooden frame when the summer sun started to bleach it. Not because I feared another attack, but because it had become more than just a structure. It was a symbol. Proof that patience, when paired with precision, could withstand even the most stubborn force. It reminded me that dignity wasn't about staying silent, but about choosing when to speak and how loud to make your point when the time came. Neighbors continued to talk about it long after the video played. Some called it the Battle of the Box, others referred to it as Mailbox Gate. Kids riding their bikes would stop and tap the side of it for luck before heading to the park. And while I never said much about it afterward, I'd smile every time I saw someone glance at it with a mix of curiosity and respect. The war was over, but the memory lingered. As for Karen, she remained on the HOA board, technically, but her voice had lost its edge. Her suggestions, once barked like orders, were now met with quiet resistance, polite pushback, even open disagreement. Her authority, once built on intimidation, had been quietly dismantled, not with protests or yelling, but with steel, concrete, and the unshakable will of a neighbor who'd simply had enough. There's a special kind of victory in that. The kind that doesn't need a parade. The kind that leaves no scars, only reminders. And if you ever pass through our neighborhood, you'll see it. Still standing, still unbroken, a mailbox that told a story without saying a word.